So let's kick it off. The first topic, building employee culture and brand to attract and retain. Wanted to open this up to Mary, Bruce, and Brad. What trends are you seeing? How does employee brand help? And why is that important to attracting and retaining based on what you're seeing? And Mary, if you want to kick that off.
Totally happy to. Yeah, so I think there's a few different things. Obviously, the times dictate, what we're seeing from just facts of like companies becoming hybrid, as people really create their return to office plans or companies coming out with being remote first. And so all that info, things that are happening, companies that are looking at really globally at a much larger scale to be more holistic. Those are all things that are really important for people within employer branding to really communicate, to really work closely with your internal comms people, your HR people and talent teams to communicate that externally to help attract, candidates, hopefully as well diverse if your company's really spearheading or doubling down within DEI. And so it's a chunk of a question, but those things are really important. Oh, did someone, don't know if someone said something there, apologies. But yeah, it's really important also to help build company culture because employer branding is your business's identity. It's who you are as a company, and that really will help, good employers will stand out to candidates when you're telling your story and also being mindful of telling your truth, your company's truth within that story. Bruce and Brad, I'll let you jump in there if you have anything to add.
I think you really hit the nail on the head because your brand is an extension of your culture, right? And culture and brand have always been prominent. I think COVID and the impact of it has forced us to think about it in more meaningful ways because we used to rely on the vibrancy of our physical space and the people, but now it's about having to do that in a virtual format. So, in the things that I think are important to keep close to are your rituals, right? So, from a culture standpoint at Drift, we were founded off of an in-office culture, but part of that was two very defined rituals of Monday morning metrics and show and tell every Friday, where the company gets up, five departments present and talk about what they shipped that week, and we've maintained that through this virtual environment that we're in right now. So I think your culture is your anchor, right? But the importance of leaning into it right now has never been more important.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has disrupted what work was or is now. And so, if you look at most recent surveys, 81% of people now expect to work remotely when the pandemic ends, and only 13% want to work in the office every day. So for a lot of companies, you have to rethink how you're not only going to work as a company, but how you're going to source and recruit talent, because now your talent pool could potentially be everywhere. The other thing we're finding beyond the culture items that you've already discussed is that compensation is becoming a big topic. I'm recruiting a comp leader right now, and if you're hiring everywhere, how do you think about compensation? Do you take a blended band of your regions and your offices? Do you go micro for every city you're looking at? How do you address that? And that's something that we're finding as a challenge. And talking to comp leaders for hopefully to join us, we're finding that that's top of mind for them as well.
So Brad, you bring up that collaboration, right, with finance, operations, and then Bruce, you had mentioned collaboration with marketing, and I think you had talked about how we all kind of bootstrap our own marketing within recruitment marketing. Bruce, can you address that and any suggestions?
So as far as building brand, I think the statement I made is I've always looked at recruiting as, sales, and we're a bunch of frustrated marketers, right? And a lot of times we don't have the luxury of having a partner from our marketing organization. I'm really fortunate right now. And it's not because Caitlin's on this Zoom, but Caitlin's our employment brand specialist and really takes the lead for us at Drift. And that's so important. But absent of that, I think the thing that is important for all of us to keep in mind is it doesn't have to be as professionalized as our marketing organizations deliver it. And it's okay to keep a scrappy component to it. I think some of the best, most meaningful branding and marketing collateral from a recruiting function is that intimacy, that scrappiness, that, that personal approach. And so, yeah, Mike, there's a blend of that. We bootstrap it, but we also partner where we're able to with the experts to be able to make sure that we're working across the broader platform.
Mary or Brad, any examples, specific examples you guys have done or could recommend?
Yeah, on my end, definitely. I mean, I love that, Bruce. I like to consider Cargurus also that way, in the sense that we're trying to tell our authentic story. This is who we are as a company, as an organization, and making sure that we're telling people what's really happening and going on internally. And so, yeah, I love that. I think that's it. There's that sense of, like you said, just being authentic and being scrappy, which I definitely agree with. I think, there's the bootstrap work, and I know, Mike, we've talked about this in our prep call versus like the skunk work that goes on, but I definitely think there's something to be said about people who do that bootstrap work and are on the grounds doing it and being hands-on.
Yeah, I think we've been fortunate in that we rebranded our company last fall, and our marketing team made sure to include the talent function in that. So it was helpful to have a seat at the table when we were doing the rebrand. I'm also fortunate to have employee engagement report to me. And so we have a couple people on our team who are responsible for creating a really engaging experience for our employees, which became a major feat last year. And our EMPS score actually went up over 15 points last year. So they did a wonderful job. The only thing I would add is that if you've got internal resources like internal comms, marketing, lean on them as much as you can. But don't be afraid to go outside if you need to. You can't do it all yourself. For example, we're reworking our career site right now. We're also putting in a tech blog, and we don't have the time to do it. And none of us are English majors, so we can't write it well. So we're actually working with an outside firm to help us with that, because sometimes you just can't do it all yourself.
Brad, great point, right? Bring in partners for that. So we did get a question from Heather. Thanks, Heather, for submitting that. And we're all in global companies right now. So all of us we're dealing with this. Heather asked, what about brand globally? How do you implement that? Are there anything else to consider, especially around engineers globally? What are you doing in regards to branding there?
Totally happy to jump in. I think the pandemic, and I know we've said this earlier, has really changed how a lot of companies think about their employer branding. I think we try to have that holistic view first of, more of that global view first and foremost, and let that present itself in the sense. And it really just depends on how your organization is set up and what work you can do, but you can incorporate, for example, we have our European HQ in Dublin. And so we try to incorporate that team as much as we can, really include team members into our meetings, into our employer branding meetings, hearing what's going on. And, we are a tech company first and foremost, like many of us obviously here. So seeing who you're partnering with, wherever that may be overseas, are there different organizations, even like a mass TLC that you can be partnering with? But there are so many things to think about, even the smallest things like language. We have this, and it's so funny with Dublin, but even though we speak the same language, there's just things to think about. There's things to think about that our cultures, are so different at the same time. So I would say make sure you're looping in stakeholders from those offices when you think about that holistic global approach.
Yeah, I think the important thing is you have that global brand, that one uniform global brand, and that's the platforms that we all have. But then creating those micro communities and those micro impressions in the markets that we work in, whether it's the Americas, EMEA, or APAC, and understanding and bringing in your stakeholders, Mary. That's the perfect point, because we don't. I mean, I'm a recruiter, and I don't live in APAC, so there are learnings that come out of it. And just one example, in full transparency, when we grew into Japan, we didn't realize that Facebook was the dominant platform there. It's not LinkedIn, Facebook is, right? So it requires a pivot, and you're only going to get those kinds of insights by working with your local teams, but bringing them into stakeholders is so important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think having a global brand, like our core values resonate across the globe, but the global focus is great. And one of the things that you can do to really help with that is to make sure that you do focus groups with stakeholders or the people you're trying to attract. If you're trying to attract engineers, get a group of engineers, in our case in Tel Aviv, and show them what you're planning on doing from a marketing perspective and see if it resonates with them. Because if it's not going to resonate with the people you already have, who you really covet and want to keep, chances are you're not going to do well attracting them with what you're putting forward.
That's awesome. At our company, we have a director of customer support who's just he's so funny. He creates this Friday afternoon get together, and he invites the whole global company to his event, and it's all customer support folks, and they get to do their work and kind of collaborate together. And Mary, we did the same thing. Our Irish guys from Dublin were on board, people in North Carolina, and we had like a vocabulary quiz. It was the funniest thing that we did. It was great. So that, you could have some internal person that's promoting the internal brand as well, like
Yep.
we do. All right, I want to switch topics to the impact of remote work on your pipeline and recruitment strategy. Specifically kind of the innovations in the recruitment strategy from COVID. What have you adjusted? There's people, process, and tools, right? And just with those considerations, what have you guys changed and adjusted for that? And Brad, do you want to start off this?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I think for us, I mean, we were a global company, and about a third of our workforce was remote to begin with. So we weren't completely unfamiliar with recruiting elsewhere. But we did realize that if we'll take the US, for example, if we can now look in any state across the country, we need to, first of all, identify where the talent is that we want. So if you have a LinkedIn recruiter seat, you can obviously use that for that. But if you don't, or actually, if you do have a LinkedIn seat, I would even suggest getting at least one LinkedIn Talent Insights seat. That will allow you to basically market map where those talents are, what parts of the country they are, so you can help decide where you're going to concentrate your efforts, or analyze your competitors and see where are their talent, where their talent is flowing to, where is it flowing from, and that will help you to gather some data, so you're not just firing off everywhere. You've got to have some focus, and so that's one thing we found has been really helpful.
Yeah,
Bruce and Mary?
Yeah, I can tag in on that. I think that I think COVID and going to a completely virtual format required us to sort of flip everything on its head a bit. A lot of us were virtual in some aspects of our business anyway. Brad, to your point, like being global companies, right? But we had to do a whole scale pivot in terms of how we engaged with talent, but also the opportunity and where to find talent. On the engagement side, that candidate experience became entirely virtual, which required us to be more sensitive to the details, right? And then it created a lot of opportunity too around unlocking schedules and the ability to streamline and expedite things. So there was genuine advantages, but I think the biggest one was the ability to think more broadly and look anywhere for talent, as opposed to being anchored to particular hubs or being anchored in the Boston market. And so that was a tremendous advantage.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, Bruce. I think it just unlocked everyone's schedule for us here at CG. And I think We weren't obviously a virtual first company pre-COVID. We were a in-person office. That was a huge part of our culture. So we had to learn so many different things about becoming in a virtual time of becoming a virtual company. So we really had to pivot there as well. But it did unlock a lot of doors, and it really did. Especially for employer branding, about how we think about our strategy. It helped us also unlock and seek out additional partnerships to help with that overall recruiting strategy to kind of source and whatnot.
Great. And we have some other questions, but if anyone wanted to submit any questions from the audience too, you can message me or Naila or the general group. We're happy to ask those questions if anything's coming up. Now you're seeing what these guys are doing and dealing with day to day. Maybe you're thinking about something someone else in the group's thinking about too. But also, this idea about time, right? Talent acquisition is always under pressure. If you can be predictive about what's going to happen, right? Kudos to you. But most of us are kind of reacting to stuff and then trying to get ahead. So, with this, endless opportunity to go global now or recruit anywhere in the United States, whatever it is, how do you narrow that? How do you keep focus? Has that been an issue with this move towards hybrid and remote?
Yeah, and I think that's what I said earlier. Starting off with where you want to look is really important, because otherwise you could just go everywhere, and that's not going to work well, generally speaking. The other thing I'll mention, and this is more the HR side of me thinking, is that before you go off and look everywhere, make sure that your company is registered to employ someone in a state that you're looking at. Or maybe if you're looking in another country, can they be tied to your entity in Europe? And if not, maybe they have to go through a professional employer organization, which is going to add more cost and complexity. So there's a lot of things to think about before you just blast away. I think the thing that was really helpful for us, and I certainly for me personally in my own recruiting, is using a tool called Intello. And Intello is a really nice sourcing tool that allows you to automate your recruitment marketing. So you can build campaigns with up to 7 touches. You can send messages on behalf of other people, and you can build these sequences and define the time in between with links. And you can track it. You can see when they've clicked on it, what they've clicked on, how many times they've opened it, what time of day, what device. There's all kinds of things you can do there. And that automation has, kind of freed us up to have more time to do other things, because you're right. If you just go everywhere, you'll wait, you'll look at the clock and the day's over, and you haven't gotten where you want to be.
I think that's a huge point that can't go unrecognized, because when the target gets really big, right, it can almost become unmanageable. You want to hire within a strategy. You want to. For us, we want to continue to lean into our offices in Boston, Tampa, San Francisco, et cetera. But you do have the ability to go and look for great talent anywhere. So there's a lot of things that are bundled in there. Brad's completely right. There's a lot of heavy lifting that goes into getting set up in states that you're not set up in. So understanding markets and letting the data direct you is a tremendous advantage in terms of where to do some of that heavy lifting. But the other opportunity too is how it unlocks communities and gets you into opportunistic conversations that might not exist in Boston. Boston, as great of a city as it is, it doesn't necessarily offer us as much as we would want. A tremendously diverse candidate pool. We don't always have that benefit here in Boston. So being free to go anywhere in the country or anywhere on the globe gives us the ability to go off and find talent in a way that is very additive to our organizations.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It is great when you can and you do have that freedom, especially when everyone is on board for DEI strategy and initiatives and trying to find underrepresented folks. But I think one other thing is that, when you can unlock, and have, a wide scope of where you can source and recruit, I think it's being mindful too of, what your return to office policy is, and making sure that you're communicating that to folks as well of what potential expectations are, even though it can be really hard to foresee the future, and making sure that's clear as well. If you are going back to a hybrid model, and you do require people to be in office, is that you're making sure that that communication is streamlined throughout all of recruiting for expectations.
Awesome. So Kayla, thank you, Kayla. You just threw out a question to us, which is a metrics-based question. So, given the situation in the new normal, has the optimal number of recs per recruiter changed? Like, what's the optimum number of recs per recruiter? So I call this this is a jelly bean jar question, right? How many jelly beans are in the jar? And actually, the right answer might be the average of everyone on this call. I'm not sure, but what do you guys think?
I think one is, it's always good to understand your historical capability of your team, right? So you understand what your capacity is. And sometimes when you, like in our case, we are hiring year over year, Q1 versus Q1, 250% higher. So it was really easy for me to go and ask for more headcount because, the math is the math, right? But I mean, in our world, generally speaking, 10 to 12 recs is pretty good for what we need for a recruiter, and we're north of 20 right now. So that tells you you're in a tough spot. And we do very little early career hiring, so it makes it a little more challenging in that regard. So I think if you understand your team's past capacity and what they've done performance-wise, start with the end in mind, go to your number of hires, offer to acceptance rate, number of interviews to offer, the whole pipeline in reverse. You can really quickly think about, how to count those beans and make sure that at the end of the day, you have the team that can fill the jar.
Yeah, I like the jelly bean analogy, Mike. And the answer to the question really, I think, is the fewer the better, right? Because the fewer number of recs that you have, the more you can influence that candidate experience, the more time that you can invest to be a good strategic partner to the business. Brad, you're completely right. Not all recs are equal, and there's high volume roles, and you have to take that into consideration. But the way that we sort of think about it is keeping between 10 and 12, not to be over a top line of 15. Right? It just the higher the rec load, the more you have to give up. And I think right now, when we're thinking about brand and we're thinking about our ability to engage and deliver just an amazing experience within our functions, we want to give ourselves that kind of capacity to invest in that area, because sometimes it can get lost just in the noise of making sure that we're filling roles.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Excellent. Mary, did you want to add too?
No, I think I'd reiterate what was said prior, but when everyone's running so thin, it can be really hard to forget those crucial points, which are branding and candidate experience and engagement. So good to think about.
Awesome. We have another great question from Jody. This is about going beyond the branding and the sourcing challenges to where the rubber hits the road with the hiring managers. And, Jody's saying, well, what about that education partnership with the hiring managers, getting them to be flexible, because not every candidate's going to be an exact fit. So how do you approach that? How do you kind of persuade and get them to open that bullseye a little bit more for you within talent acquisition? Or do you not do that?
I think intake sessions are obviously the key meeting, right? From the recruiter has a rec and now they're meeting with their manager. And again, this is where data is helpful. Whether you use LinkedIn Recruiter or Talent Insights, you can show your manager based on these 20 things you want. Here's your talent pool, and it's like 30 people. Congratulations, you're going to fail, right? So the idea of the recruiter isn't necessarily to shoehorn the manager into opening up their spec, but to lead with data and say, look, if you want these 10 things, our pool expands exponentially. If you cut it to these 5, it triples or whatever. And so instead of just you saying, I want to open up the spec, try to use some data to do that. And now where you can look nationally, that makes it a little easier. As long as, like Mary said, as long as you're clear about this person can work remotely full time, because that's what they're going to have to do. So I tend to think of it more as a data-driven exercise as opposed to an adversarial conversation, because then the data is not biased, right? And it makes it easier for the recruiter to have that conversation with the manager or the talent leader to talk to the VP of the department, for that matter.
Yeah, I think it's less about, like, I don't look at it in terms of having to try to, force the conversation around expanding the target. I think I agree with you, Brad. I think it's a partnership, right? And data helps to create clarity, and the data will set you free. But for me, I think the important point is just to be able to help them understand what the risks are, right? In keeping that tight target, like, what are we willing to absorb? Like, what is the business? What's the business urgency? And I also think there's a element of lift there, right? Going one for one, sure, but if there's 20% of flexibility, the 80-20 rule, where we bring in 80% of what you already know, but we give you lift and the opportunity to learn 20% that you're not doing right now, like, that's a tremendous competitive advantage when you're talking about opportunity or talking about somebody, changing career paths or changing companies.
Yeah, what can be coached? Our chief product officer is really good about that. Like, like, what's a must, but what can be coached? And if somebody brings something maybe that's tertiary to the list, but they have opportunity to learn the primary, is that a doable scenario for you? And some managers are really good about that. Others aren't.
So what about beyond the data, right, and the evidence? But let's say a hiring manager says, you know what, I really like people from X company or these type of companies, or I really want them with this type of education or from these type of schools. Are you using data to show that, or can you show, how do you persuade, like, hey, we could bridge that gap by doing X, Y, or Z? Are you having those type of conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at the VP senior C-suite level, a lot of the conversations I have is around the talent pools that exist across the globe and where we can find the right talent. And when people come to me with specific school or company or whatever, the question inevitably is why? What is it about that, right? And frequently it's more what I call affinity recruiting. That's what they're familiar with, or maybe they came from that school, or they know, and that's great. But again, getting to diversity, like, we don't want to just hire more and more of the same, because then we have a homogenous product team or a marketing team or whatever. So that's the kind of conversation we typically tend to have. What I usually ask, and I encourage my recruiters to do, if we get a new role, let me go talk to the best person on your team. Who's the gold standard for this role? And let's benchmark that, as opposed to just saying it's a school or it's a company.
Yeah, Mike, when you're talking about that, like, bias was rolling through my head, right?
Yeah,
and,
right.
and when I have the same reaction when I hear, well, 3 to 4 years of experience. Well, why 4 years of experience, right? It's more around background and skill level, and when it comes to campuses and prior companies, the affinity recruiting, I love that, right? So I think the opportunity really goes back to that intake session, which for me has always been that seminal conversation where you drive that partnership and what's possible, and what are we, what can we, what can we align on in terms of the parameters of the search, right? And being able to break some molds, or break some preconceptions to help us out, or try to accelerate things and open the pool.
Mary, at Cargurus, are you bringing that into the brand, those ideas? Are you pushing that out?
Yeah, totally. I mean, Brad, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, when you start really becoming specific with specific schools, only top 3 schools you want to recruit for. And obviously you see this a lot in campus recruiting, but campus or recruiting in that area is supposed to help your company bring more diverse, underrepresented folks into your organization, which everyone needs, and Bruce, I know we've chatted about this before, but versus, a goal or a responsibility. And I loved how you framed it as it's our responsibility as talent acquisition to, talk about that and set clear expectations about what's realistic versus not. But yeah, we definitely bring that into our conversations. We have a great, DIBS team internally now that really helps us also with that work. So, we bring that within our employer branding as well.
Great. So I think we're doing really well. We got 20 minutes left right now. We've covered a lot of topics. I want to move to the third topic, which is interviewing and onboarding and the innovations around that. I think all of us had that moment when we knew where we were when the company was saying, okay, everyone's going home, everyone's going remote. And, here in Nasuni, our first question was, we had interviews that were scheduled to be on site that we needed to call people and say, okay, you're not coming in. So that's led to some real innovations on our team. And I just want to throw it out to you guys. What was the reaction that you had in terms of, oh, form follows function, we can create something new here, and what things will you continue with that have worked out well?
I think one of the best things is we've eliminated the scheduling piece of having to schedule someone 4 hours back to back or 3 hours back to back to back. We can spread out the timing, and that makes it a lot easier from a candidate experience standpoint. And I think candidates appreciate not having to sit in a room for 2.5 hours, 3 hours. So that's been a positive for us. I think the other thing for us has been, I think just the virtual recruiting that we're doing now, and we know through our data that employer referrals are 4 times more likely to get hired than any other source, and they have a tenure on average 1.5 times greater. So we've over-indexed on employer referrals, and we've really been pushing that. And in the old days, you could do like LinkedIn lunch parties, right? And you could buy pizza and have people come in and go through their networks. So now that has to be done more at an individual level. But it's been successful, and we're almost 40% of our hires now are referrals. So there have been some things that we've just been forced to do, like we were not using Calendly before. Now I have a Calendly link on all my messaging, so we don't have to go back and forth on the scheduling piece. Just little things like that, plus the automated sourcing we've done, I think have been good things for us.
Yeah, I think the first reaction was, oh my gosh, Zoom just became our best friend, right? But the most important thing that it forced us to do is figure out how to create that culture engagement. Again, thinking back to how we used to really leverage our spaces and our people, like the physicality of what we were doing, right? We all would bring candidates in and we'd give a tour of the office, because you want people to understand and see where they're going to work and how it's going to feel on a day-to-day basis. The most important thing that we can be doing is delivering that same experience right now, but just in a virtual format, because we're in different parts of the country. I'm sitting here in Boston. I could be talking to somebody in Salt Lake City, right? But they have to still feel that same enthusiasm and sense of culture and belonging. In a lot of ways, like, this was a tremendous opportunity for all of us to create equality, right? Because we all had these split workforces between in office and out of office, and this dynamic of 5 people in a conference room, 2 people on it. We're all on Zoom now. It's great, right? We all are having the same experience, and I'm a remote employee now. I was never a remote employee before. But the importance of delivering that sense of belonging and culture, it became even more important as we flipped into a purely digital format.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think the culture emphasis is massive. Our internal comms team and everyone, really, not just I love how people look at internal comms. Maybe is that a responsibility for these periods in time that we're in, but it's really an all hands on deck. Everyone, has a responsibility to help build that culture and to maintain it. Especially when we're interviewing and setting that expectation with hiring managers. Times are different. What are expectations around showing that culture to employees for that, candidates for that engagement? So
And I think the challenge that we're going to be confronted with is, how does this keep evolving, right? Because as we start to leave the impact of COVID, there are some companies that are going to stay in a digital first format, like Drift as an example. We feel like we went through a one-way door. We took an edge, and we're changing our offices to conversation spaces. So the intent is that our people are not going to the office, right? As opposed, there are some that'll go hybrid. Like, how do you combine or how do you pivot that recruiting interaction, right? So there are going to be some challenges there to figure out. But again, the opportunity to let emphasize and impact brand, you got to be able to keep it consistent.
Right. Yeah, and I think the last piece on this is just the worry of the Great Resignation, right? Like everyone's, there's this, depending on who you read, 26% of people are planning on changing jobs when the pandemic is over, or they feel there's an all clear sign, and that's double what the normal rate is. And the number one reason is for work-life balance. So as not only as a recruiter, but also as an employer, you're going to have to think about how you can create an engaging hybrid experience, if that's possible, or digital first, as Bruce's company is doing, to make sure you don't lose all those people that you work so hard to hire.
Well, I think as recruiters, let's just be honest, right? Like, recruiting is a 24/7 job. And I can't see everyone's faces right now, but I gotta believe you're all smiling, right? So it's a 24/7 job. So someone told me one time, they used the phrase, "it's all life." And I haven't lost that, because it is, we balance it. And now with a completely digital environment, we have the ability to have better structure, put ourselves in the driver's seat of trying to manage work, life. I mean, the balance is great. Brad's point, like when you said the great resignation, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's perfect, because that's what we're in right now. And a lot of people are looking to move so that they keep that flexibility. That's where retention comes in. That's where opportunities to continue to keep our coworkers engaged through mobility programs and learning and development functions. And how do we continue to invest in them, invest in each other as both people and professionals? Like, that places even more emphasis on that to counterbalance that.
Great. So I want to talk about this candidate experience and the candidate journey, right? So during COVID, just imagine every candidate who, like Bruce, what you were saying, recruiting might be a 24/7 job, looking for a job might become a 24/7 job, and they always have questions like, what's your process? What should I expect? What's going to happen? So from a branding perspective, and Mary, I'll throw this out to you first. Like, are you helping candidates at this time in terms of that candidate experience, candidate journey? What's happening, and then secondarily, are you measuring like how your messaging is getting to them? Are we doing a good job messaging that to everyone, and where do you track that?
No, totally. So yeah, I mean, it is so crucial as times evolve to make sure that there is clear messaging, and that candidates are having a fantastic experience. But yeah, it really depends on your strategy and what you can do as a team, because you can do so much. But it can start off with collateral, right? Like, what are recruiters, telling candidates? What are they sending candidates? Are they sending them, for example, we have a prep package, that talks about, what that experience looks like when they're interviewing, sending them media, ops that we've done, talking about relevant topics, of the times. And once again, setting expectations of, what our priorities are, what our values are, et cetera. And also, what we're putting out there on social. So it can really be extensive, and it can really have a wide wingspan. But we do measure, we utilize, Greenhouse, for example, for our ATS. So we dive into there for different reports. We measure our social channels. We're seeing who's clicking on, different links or whatever it may be. So we do measure in various ways to make sure that people are getting that information, and then also having recruiters talk to candidates, and getting that direct feedback from them. The best is when they open up a prep package or a flyer, PDF, whatever it may be, an article or whatever, and getting that lifetime feedback is really fantastic.
Yeah, we use Greenhouse as well, and we send out candidate surveys
Mhm.
to measure our effectiveness and keep an eye on that. We also have manager feedback as well. So I have a recruiter scorecard for anyone who hired a candidate in the prior month. We send those out, and we keep track of that as well. I think the biggest thing for the recruiters, and this goes back to, I think, Bruce's comment earlier about having more time to partner, is that now because of COVID, the recruiters have to spend more time with the candidate than they used to, because you could build that rapport in person or whatever when they interviewed. Now it's all virtual. And so how do you instill your culture, your values, your process, what you care about? And you can send people things, which is great, and it's really important, but that also requires an additional conversation, because in this market, especially for what we're recruiting for, people have lots of choices. So how do they decide? The job's kind of similar, but how do you know the culture of company A versus company B? And so I've asked my recruiters to spend more time on that, because at the end of the day, if you're qualified for the job, you're going to get plenty of offers. You're going to, either join the manager or the company or both. And our goal is to make sure the recruiter really instills to the candidate the values of both.
Yeah, and I don't really think that this part of our job has changed at all between what things used to be and what they are right now. And transparency in the process and partnering with our candidates was always critical. And we talk a lot about experience at our companies, right? And the thing that I would love everybody to think about is that interview experience that we think about, that it oftentimes feels so one directional in terms of how did the candidate perceive us. It's really a 360-degree experience, right? And that internal experience, and we talk about this a lot at Drift, the internal experience with our hiring managers should be as exceptional, and we should be delighting them in the same way that we're trying to delight candidates and help them. So it's getting those data points, and we run our NPSs, like those are two very valuable touch points in terms of measuring effectiveness and performance.
All right, great. So I want to bring up the other topic we talked about on our prep call, because you guys had really good ideas about what's the role of talent acquisition in DEI, and who decides where the importance is, and how do you get the organization involved? And so from a talent acquisition standpoint, with all this stuff going on around us, like how do we bring everyone together to accomplish those goals? What are you guys seeing? And Brad, you want to start with
Sure. I mean, it starts with your senior management team, right? If you don't have the C-suite cover for this, it's going to be difficult to drive it. I think that's number one. For us, from a recruiting standpoint, and again, Intello is a great tool for this. We have a diversity filter in that product that allows us to actively over-index on underrepresented groups in our sourcing. So we can actually build diverse talent pools and report on that to our leaders so they can see that. We can use an unbiased sourcing mode. So when we send candidates to a manager, we can redact things from the resume that might create bias. The other feature I really like about Intello is it will give you profiles similar to a profile you like. For example, women are known to generally underreport their skills by 16%. And they tend to apply for roles that are at or even a little below their current ability, whereas men are not that's not the case, right? So it allows us to then grab more people into our talent pool who have those skills, but it's more inferred because they haven't listed it, right? So that's one of the things that we do. And then, Bruce, and I talked about this earlier before, is that when we hire a VP or a very senior person, we want to see at least 2 women candidates in that pool before we move to an offer. And so that's something we're working on, not only in engineering, but also in some of our other roles, but certainly at the senior level.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, it's not a question of bringing the organization with us on that journey, because for us, it comes from the top down. DC and Elias, as our founders, are set set the tone as they launched the company, and being recognized leaders in how to build a company in the new corporate America. So in that regard, very fortunate as part of the overall commitment by the company. But keeping that top of mind and fresh is key. I talked about our rituals each week. Monday morning metrics, recruiting is part of Monday morning metrics, where we have the opportunity to talk about performance and need. And part of that need is around how we build the organization. And really, it goes back again. I hate to keep banging the drum on the intake session, but that partnership, Brad, that's what we were talking about, right? We have the opportunity within recruiting to be able to ask the questions and challenge our businesses around, what is truly going to benefit their teams, what's truly going to benefit the organization, and really taking a holistic view of, the structure of teams and where we should really be, where we should really be focusing within our recruiting activity. So it goes back to partnership as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd reiterate that. And, especially from an employer branding standpoint, making sure that we're telling that to our candidates, that we're doing those things internally is so important, because people, rightfully so, look for that. That is something that could be a deal breaker for a candidate if they don't feel that their potential company is a safe space for them. And there's so many things to think about. It's someone who identifies from an underrepresented, group, you have to make sure as a company, it's your responsibility that you're creating that safe space, and that, throughout, from beginning to end, their journey is one continuous, safe space. So it's so important for so many reasons.
That's great. At Nasuni, we have a culture club that's very active, and they reached out to talent acquisition and said, hey, we want you to present on what you're doing. What are the channels? How are you opening this up? So I thought there was accountability here, with a very active culture club coming to us and saying, hey, we want to get involved in that. So that was great.
Mike, I want
Yeah,
to touch on the accountability piece of it that you just mentioned, because holding ourselves accountable is super important. Because there's a faction of the trust wheel around lip service, and we've got to move past that and actually make things actionable, Mary, which is what you were saying. You can talk about it, but people have to see it in action, and holding ourselves accountable in terms of who we're generating for, candidate slates, right? And our job is to make sure we're delivering balanced, qualified candidate slates for the work that we're doing, and that accountability piece is something that is an important measurable.
Awesome. I am going to just thank everyone right now. This has been super enjoyable for me to participate. This community at Mass TLC is phenomenal. I've learned so much from all of you over the years. Naila, I want to bring you in to wrap it up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bruce, Mary, Brad, for sharing your insights, for Mike, for seamlessly, as always, moderating, and for each of you for showing up. We have some great brain power here in this virtual room. Many of you have participated. I just want to encourage anybody, if you have a great topic you want to explore, or if you want to come forward and host a meeting as a member, please let me know. We get very excited to pull together topics that are in need. And with that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time. And just to give you a minute or two back to your day.
Thanks, Nala. And it's great to see everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Bruce.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Naila.
All right.
Thank
Happy
you.
recruiting.